This was the best team I ever had at Louisville, and after a heartbreaking end to last season where we went 12-1 and we were snubbed out of the college football playoffs, I knew I didn't want to feel that pain again. Additionally, I'm hoping I can finally bring an ACC Championship home to Louisville this season, but it's time to see how good this team really is as we were starting off the year on the road at number 14 Penn State. At the end of the first quarter, my offense was showing off how talented it was, with Bobby Babcock connecting with sophomore Jerome Brown for a 63-yard play, and then the junior took it in right after. However, the defense had taken a step back from last year, so that could end up being a big problem. Fortunately, even though we should have won by more, after Bobby Babcock and Jerome Brown hooked up for another massive play, we were in the perfect position to burn through the rest of the time on the clock and win in the final seconds. But I had to get everyone focused because I was coaching against Deion Sanders at Colorado, who had multiple seasons to turn them around. So this would not be an easy one to pull off, but I knew if we could avoid turning it over, we would probably be fine. So you can probably imagine how upset I was when Bobby Babcock threw a pick on our first drive. I chewed him out for it, and he made up for the turnover just minutes later as he led the offense down the field using his legs and getting us into the end zone with ease. Anyways, with 2 minutes left, it was still tied up, so that meant the game was in the hands of my defense and they needed to make a play for us, which they completely failed to do so. That left Bobby Babcock with less than a minute left to get us into the Buffalo's end zone, and he came so close to pulling it off, connecting with Jerome Brown, but even though the ball was across the line when he caught it, I wasn't able to challenge it, which meant we lost to Colorado. And you'd think that would ruin our playoff hopes, but it actually did the exact opposite. If we won out, we would win the ACC and make the college football playoffs, so that motivated the entire team as we played our best game yet. Kentucky had no counter to the read option, and our rivalry game couldn't have gone better as this win was huge for keeping team morale up. After our great performance against the Wildcats, we were back on track to making the playoffs, and since we were playing at undefeated number 12 Georgia Tech, we had an opportunity to get a massive win. Bobby Babcock started off the game with this rushing touchdown, and I had finally figured out how I wanted to use him after I watched him lay this ball perfectly into the hands of Justin Carter. I realized that due to the threat of him running, I could freeze defenses up with play action plays, and if I'm being honest, Georgia Tech let him do whatever he wanted against them. Like I said, our one loss wouldn't ruin our playoff hopes, but instead, I think it was a great wake-up call as Bobby Babcock finished with 5 touchdowns and continued to dominate against Duke. From what I've seen so far, I think I need to make play action passing plays the main focus of my offense because they give Bobby Babcock the flexibility to do whatever he wants, and whenever he can't find an open receiver, he'll find a way to score anyway. We went into the half up 31, and even though we couldn't hold the Blue Devils scoreless, this was still an amazing win. However, our next matchup was extremely tough. My team was hosting undefeated number 3 Clemson, and this game would determine who wins the ACC. So obviously, I was not happy with how it started as we looked terrible, but I guess Bobby Babcock had it all under control, looking like Patrick Mahomes with deep bombs like this and scrambling in for touchdowns like he was Lamar Jackson. His development has been amazing as he continued to improve on the ground and in the air, and due to that, his draft stock was skyrocketing. So I knew this could be the last season Bobby Babcock plays college football, as he put up 52 on the Tigers. This win proved we were legit, and unfortunately for Eagles fans, we also confirmed that when we traveled to Boston and ran up the score on the worst team in the ACC, which kept us on top of the division and shot Bobby Babcock up the Heisman boards. My defense started against Florida State, forcing a safety, and we were off to an amazing start. However, it was tied by the end of the third quarter, and I just wanted to escape Doak S. Campbell Stadium with a win, but that wasn't looking likely. After Florida State took a lead, the game was in the hands of Bobby Babcock, and he hadn't been on today. So I was relieved that he moved us down the field despite all of his struggles and tied it up for us. Then, in overtime, we put the Seminoles in a box as Jamar Lilly forced a huge turnover, which obviously would completely seal the game for us. Freshman kicker Brian Watson put it away, and we escaped what would have been a big upset. Last season, Syracuse ruined our college football playoff and ACC championship hopes, so I was hoping that they wouldn't do that again this year. But they were ranked 9th in the country, only had 1 loss, and got on the board first. So this would not be an easy win for my Cardinals, especially because the rain had only seemed to hurt us so far. However, Bobby Babcock persevered anyway, tying the game up, but after he got run through by the Orange defense, he gave up a very costly turnover. Syracuse was our kryptonite, so luckily, Bobby Babcock's frustration with how the game was going just made him perform even better. That's one of the things that separates good quarterbacks from great ones, and he was proving that he could be relied on with it all on the line as we finally took the lead. But after our defense gave up another touchdown, and on top of that, the 2-point conversion, it looked like it was going downhill extremely fast for us. However, on 4th and 22, with the game on the line, Bobby Babcock laid the ball perfectly into the arms of Josh Wilson, and then Lee Washington made the play of the night, picking off the Syracuse quarterback, which would lead to us getting the win in the final seconds. That one almost gave me a heart attack, so I was ready to get through the last 3 regular season games of the year. In the first one against 1-8 Virginia Tech, it was a lot closer than I would have liked it to be, but Bobby Babcock made sure we kept putting up points and left with our 9th win, making us the #1 team. We proved that we deserved to be there against Wake Forest as we safely continued our winning streak, and the last week of the regular season we played at NC State. Harvey Beck had taken over at halfback because Mike Samuel had been out with a strained back, but he would return by the ACC Championship if we were able to make that game because we were struggling to take down the Wolfpack. It was a very close battle, but fortunately we pulled away in the end and finished the regular season 11-1. Obviously, we made the conference championship and I was ready to get into the postseason, but first I have to briefly mention this video's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy, which you can play in all of the yellow states. They'll give you free cash to play around with on player pick'ems like this, where you try to correctly predict higher or lower on player stat lines. If you sign up to Underdog using code Bordeaux or the first link in my description, they'll double your initial deposit, so if you put in like $10, you'll get $20, and that gives you more to play with, so make sure to check them out after the video. But now, it's time to get into the postseason. I was coaching in my first ever ACC Championship game, and we scored the first touchdown. Not only was Miami unranked and 8-4 on the year, but they also had a kicker that didn't have a very strong leg, so I was ticked that approaching halftime, they were beating us. I know my whole team was looking ahead to the college football playoffs, but there was no excuse for turning the ball over multiple times in the red zone, so fortunately, after I led a motivational halftime speech, Bobby Babcock and the offense turned it around as he took this run all the way into Miami Hurricane territory. Minutes later, he evaded the defense to put us up, but Miami took the lead on this touchdown run, so when Bobby Babcock delivered this dot with 30 seconds left, and my defense made sure that Miami didn't pull off the miracle Hail Mary play at the end of the game, I was pumped to bring an ACC championship to the Ville. But our work was not done yet, and I couldn't believe Bobby Babcock lost the Heisman. Our college football playoff semifinal matchup was against Florida Atlantic, so even though we gave up an early touchdown, I was pretty confident we'd win. With about 3 minutes left in the half, Bobby Babcock got us into the end zone, but I can't pretend like he was playing a very good game. On top of this, we failed to go into the half up 3, and even though the freshman kicker got us back on track, this was a much closer game than it should have ever been. Florida Atlantic was staying in it, running the option better than us, so it's a good thing that Bobby Babcock finally decided to come alive again. Recently, his draft stock had been tanking as he was down to a 3rd round prospect because there were a lot of concerns about if his game would translate well to the NFL. But bad news struck as he somehow tore his shoulder on that last play, which would rule him out for the national championship. So even though my defense clutched up and made sure that we got through to the final big game, we were in a lot of trouble because we were going to be playing against Ohio State. I was coaching in my first ever national championship game, but for the 2nd year in a row, I was missing my starting quarterback when it mattered the most. Backup junior Daryl Johnson was responsible for trying to pull off a miracle win, and we did not start the game well. Even though Ohio State was the 4 seed, they won their semifinal game 58-14 over Air Force, so I was not surprised that Daryl Johnson was struggling against the Buckeyes. I just couldn't believe that Bobby Babcock was injured. I mean, I had to be the unluckiest coach in college football, but if I want any chance of pulling this off, I need to stop complaining. We weren't out of it yet, and this safety to start the third quarter was massive. On top of that, Mike Samuel was leading the offense down the field with his legs, and somehow we were able to take the lead. But it wouldn't last long. In fact, it lasted approximately 30 seconds because Daryl Johnson not only turned the ball over on this 2-point conversion, but let Ohio State take it all the way back to go up 16-15. From there, he was messed up in the head as he threw it to the wrong receiver, which also resulted in the Buckeyes taking it back to the house, but for 6 this time. So despite any last-minute attempts to try and fight our way back into the game, I fell just short of bringing a championship home to Louisville, and if I couldn't convince Bobby Babcock to stay for his senior year, I might be receptive to other coaching jobs, including the NFL.